Hi, it's lovely to meet you all. My name is Ruth Garrett, and I run Ruth Kittiwake, which is um, videography, photography, and I'm also a long-term volunteer for Friends of the Dales. And I want to talk to you here today about how to connect young adults to the Yorkshire Dales. And the best way I thought of doing it was to tell you a bit about how I got involved with Friends of the Dales, how I got involved with different projects, with different organisations, and what I've learned from that journey. I'm also going to be talking about how Creative Campaigners came to be, which is an amazing project that Friends of the Dales have launched recently, as well as the issues that affect young adults in the living and working in and around the Yorkshire Dales, and hopefully end on a positive note with future solutions. So, a bit about me. I grew up in Skipton, just south of the Dales. I have always had access to the Dales through my parents, and I've always loved the Dales and walking in the Dales and all of that, which I'm sure many of you will relate to. I have a decade of experience working and volunteering with environmental charities, and you may be saying, but you're so young, how can you have a decades of experience? I'm 26 and I started volunteering for Friends of the Dales when I was 15. So it's been a decade. I have a degree in film and television from the University of Lincoln, and through that, as well as my experience with the environmental sector, I am now a documentary filmmaker and photographer under the name Ruth Kittiwake. So I thought I'd start at the beginning. When I first started volunteering with Friends of the Dales, I was 15. I just finished my GCSEs and I ended up doing administration volunteering in terms of mail outs for Friends of the Dales. And this was my first real experience of hearing different people speak about issues that were important to them in the Dales. I also went on walks, and the people who I was interacting with were all incredibly lovely, incredible, passionate people, but I was by far the youngest in the room. And I have throughout a lot of my life been the youngest in the room. So I would sit during mail outs at the franking machine, listening to the different things that people were talking about who were also there. So trustees from Friends of the Dales and volunteers from Friends of the Dales. And I would hear about different issues that were really important to them. For example, barns and planning. Dales Barns, I had no idea was such a big topic and such a big passion project for people. And it was really fascinating for me because the issues that people were talking about whilst I was volunteering were completely different to the issues that affected me. Whether they weren't as there was no importance in terms of differentiation, but they were just different. And I found it really interesting that what was important to me wasn't really talked about. So I have done lots of different things with Friends of the Dales. I was a project leader on Capturing the Past, their project to download, digitize, and summarize 150 editions of the Yorkshire Dales Review, which was, as I've said, a crash course in Dales history. You can see the first review ever here, which was published in 1982, and this is the edition that was coming out when I finished that project, which I also wrote an article in, which was the 120th, which came out in spring 2020. So this was I did this work just before COVID-19. So you can see me there with all of the magazines that I did. And this is the wonderful Nancy, who is a trustee for Friends of the Dales, who I worked alongside. And she was an amazing point of contact for giving context and information about things that I just didn't know about. And I thought that I knew a lot until I read 150 of these magazines. What I found really interesting, though, was the fact that you could track through the magazines different important issues, different campaigns, what was important to people at the time. And there was things that were different, like the Green Lanes Act was a real big issue. And when that happened in the early 2000s, it sort of moved on to different things. But there has always been talk about access, about public transport, about housing, things that are still talked about now were talked about then. There was also a brilliant thing in the earlier editions, which was they would feature poems about the Dales. There was some amazing things. They would feature different writers, different artists, and art, which I am very passionate about, and from my filmmaking sort of background, was present within these magazines. And I thought that was just really amazing. So this was my first documentary, and it was also the first time I worked with Campaign for National Parks. I was able to apply for and was granted their New Perspectives bursary to create a documentary starring the wonderful Anthony Bradley, who is a farmer up near Long Preston, and also was a trustee for Friends of the Dales. So Friends of the Dales really helped in terms of connecting me with Anthony. It was an amazing experience. I learned so much. After my first sort of Zoom meeting with Anthony, I came away with, I think, like 3-page long list of different reading materials and different things to look up. And it was just fascinating. What I found really interesting was I was coming at this from the perspective of nature-based farming, how you balance food production with the nature-based farming. And what came out of it was the heart that is at the core of farming in the Dales and what farming really means to people. I also learned a lot about different subsidies, about different farming history. It was a whole load of information that was just amazing. And I would like to show you a little clip if it works. Hopefully it worked earlier. So yeah, so this is a snippet from the end of my documentary. If you'd like to watch the whole thing, it's available on YouTube on Campaign for National Parks YouTube page under Cultivating Carbon Cows.
This lad just said, "'Cause it's a disease." And I think that's the best description I've ever heard of farming. Because it's a disease, it's a chronic, possibly terminal disease that you can't shake off. 2 paracetamol won't fix it. It's like an itch you constantly have to scratch, and it's yeah, I can't stop it. I don't want to stop it.
So that was a snippet from my film. What happened next in sort of my timeline was I was volunteering in the office of Friends of the Dales. I think I might have been editing that film just like on a break, and or I was in the office, but I was doing some admin. And unfortunately, a member of the Friends of the Dales team had fallen ill and was unable to go to the Friends of Society's conference in Snowdonia. And I put my hand up and went, "Oh, I'll come." I thought it'd be an amazing opportunity, but also it was a trip to Snowdon and the area, which I wasn't going to pass up. What I got out of this trip was really, really amazing. It was the same experience. You can see me over here. I'm somehow the only one who's in light, but it was, yeah, I was the youngest person in the room yet again. I think there was a few other younger people, and when I say younger, I mean like under the age of 35, who attended the conference, but they were attending as employees. People would constantly come up to me during this conference because I stuck out a little bit, saying, "Oh, how did you do this? How did you get involved? How are you here?" And I'd go, "Well, I have like nearly a decade's experience. I was 24 at the time of volunteering for Friends of the Dales. I've just made this campaign for National Park film," and it was always the same questions that people would ask me was, how do we get young people involved? How do we get young people interested? You're a young person, what do we do? And I'm sort of there suddenly having the weight of all the young people in the entire country and national park on my shoulders to answer these questions. And my response is just, at the time, was just like, talk to them. But the issue there is, how do they find them? So it was also really interesting because it was the first conference post COVID-19. So we'd just come out of lockdown, we'd come out of people having to stay home for their holidays, and the influx of visitors to national parks and the influx of different demographic, different ages going to national parks and starting to use national parks in ways that are not this classic stereotype of walking with a backpack. Snowdonia was a really interesting place to be as well, because of the pressure that they are under and their experience with the pressure of the amount of people coming to national parks, along with the Lake Districts. I sort of see them as a model of what the future of national parks may be across the country. It was also really interesting being one of the sort of younger people in the room who's grown up with different opinions. I not dislike, but I avoid using the term Gen Z. I am just Gen Z. And there was a lot of talk about sort of the younger generation as this monolith, which is very scary. People going into national parks, having raves, which I'm not condoning at all, but also people playing music when they're by the river, sort of having a couple of drinks. People going and enjoying the Dales, enjoying national parks, which is in ways which haven't been seen before. I also found it really interesting where people's perspective was coming from. There was a lot of, we live here, we deserve to be here, but other people don't deserve to come in. But then at the same time, we want access, we need to get other people to experience nature in order to be invested in nature. And I thought the dichotomy of these discussions were really interesting. And from my perspective, it is a privilege to visit these places. It is a privilege to live in these places. But priority for the cultural heritage, I did find it interesting that there was a lot of people who were saying, no, I need to live here. But it was people who had moved into national parks probably 10 years ago. I don't know whether that is something that I've made up in my head. I don't think it is. But and I'm not saying anybody was like that. Social media was also a really big contention. There was a lot of talk about how places would go viral on TikTok or Instagram. You would then get this influx of people going and visiting these places, and the national parks and the rangers and volunteers were just not prepared. I found this really fascinating because my perspective of social media was, that is amazing. You have someone seeing something on social media and then going to the place. In terms of like marketing and engagement, that is just extraordinary. And it sort of showed how much of an interest and how much of a draw national parks can be in terms of getting people engaged with national parks. But there was people just didn't understand that it could be this amazing thing. It was just all negative. Social media is the enemy. And I'm sat there going, well, it could be good. It's just utilizing it in a way. And as a result of I've put complaining to the right people, campaign for national park, the people there were there, and I ended up after dinner complaining and sort of airing out some of my grievances. I think I was talking about Instagram, and I got offered the an ambassadorship for campaign for national parks. So complaining to the right people works. So in terms of becoming a campaign for national parks ambassador, this was happening at the same time I moved to Horton in Ribblesdale in the Yorkshire Dales, where I started working in a pub there as a live-in staff member. I wanted a job in the Dales so that I could have some money coming in, and I could also do my filmmaking work as well. This experience was amazing. This was in the summer of 2023, so I would have been 25, turning 26. Being in a pub and working in a pub is the perfect place to listen to local people's issues. People chat, people talk, and the amount of different perspectives that I was getting was brilliant. I was also speaking to a lot of young people, teenagers, because these were the people who I was working alongside who had part-time jobs. What I found really interesting was people's perspective of national parks. There was a teenager who I worked with who, when I asked the question, what do you think about living in the national park, replied, what's a national park? This is someone who has lived and goes to school, and their parents have lived in the same area in the national park for years and years. There was also a sort of awareness of national parks. I don't think quite a lot of people who are outside national parks view national parks differently. For people who live in national parks, they are like the council. They're the planning sort of place. They're not there. This is your back garden. This is where you live. And so it's a different sort of opinion on what national parks are. There's also a lot of talk about tourism, the effects of tourism, especially living in Horton and Ribblesdale, where the start and end point of the Three Peaks. It's about the trespassing through people's land, farmers coming in and moaning about people disturbing different things, leaving gates open, or just sort of othering the visitors. There's a lot of, and I can understand in a way because of the housing and the school situation. The school in Horton has shut down. Where I was living in a flat in the pub, across the road, every single house was a holiday home, an Airbnb. And so towns and villages are just becoming ghost towns. It is, I can understand there's this culture is being drained from the Dales. Young people are fleeing the Dales due to issues that I'll come and talk about later. Westminster, though, oh yeah, Westminster. So this is me giving a speech where I talked about the issues that people in Horton and Ribblesdale face in the Houses of Parliament for campaign for national parks and respective awards. Oh, sorry, that's my video. I also went to the APPG for national parks, where I spoke to the minister there about housing and public transport issues. So at the same time as I was living in this amazing place with sheep sort of coming into my back garden, or my back, into the backyard, I was going down to Westminster and talking about all of these different issues. So all of this led to creative campaigners. I'm not taking sole credit, but creative campaigners I went to Friends of the Dales. I had been meeting through Campaign for National Parks, and as well as an amazing organisation in Skipton called the Artery, which is connecting young creative businesses together as a support network. I had been meeting young artists and people who were a similar age to me, who had left school, who were wanting to live and work within the national parks, who had an invested interest in the national parks. And it was really amazing to begin to connect with these people. I also realized that a lot of people didn't have the contacts and the support that I had had through my relationship with Friends of the Dales. I wanted to give others that opportunity. So I went to Friends of the Dales and suggested this, and with the sort of perspective that it wanted to be created for the young adults. I didn't want it to just be Friends of the Dales getting people to do stuff for them so that it could tick a box and be like, yeah, we do young adult stuff. I wanted it to be a give and take so that young people could get something out of it as well as Friends of the Dales. And there was a lot of discussion that went into creating these ideas. So Creative Campaigners, it's a network for young adults who live and work in the Dales and surrounding areas who mix environmental campaigning and an interest in art. So we have artists and people who work for different environmental organizations coming together to share their interests and try and make a change for issues that affect them. So the first thing that we did was the launch day, which was in Malham, which was a lot of planning went into this and a lot of thought. So myself, Anne, and Sima, who is an amazing Campaign for National Parks ambassador along with me, who she's amazing. I give her a lot of credit for how this happened. Is we had various meetings running in the lead up to the event where we discussed how the day would go, what we were going to talk about, what we would do, who we would try and contact who would be interested, and when it would be was an important thing. We picked a Saturday because we knew that a lot of people would be working 9-to-5 jobs, and a weekday probably wasn't the best time. We also offered transport bursaries to Malham, or we would pay for the cost of driving, because again, it's young people, money is tight, and we wanted to give people the incentive to come. We also offered free food, which I push for because I mean, it's free food. You stick that on a sign and people will turn up. We offered vegetarian and vegan as well. So the Malham Day was an amazing success. You can see all of the amazing people who turned up here. We went and visited Neil Heseltine and Lee Weston's Hilltop Farm, where Neil and Lee spoke to us about farming in the Dales and the issues that farmers had. The people who showed up, the creative campaigners, could ask any questions, and there was loads of interesting discussions. And it was amazing as well just to speak to people who had the same interests as you in terms of environmental issues and national park centered, Dale centered issues. And this is a lovely belted Galloway that was very friendly and very soft. What came next was the Society's conference, which was based in the Lake District. Friends of the Lake District hosted us. It was a very different experience for me from the Snowdonia conference the year before. There was bursaries offered to young adults, young people to come and join the conference. Creative campaigners attended. There was, I think in total, there was 10 people on these bursaries. The atmosphere was very different. It was really amazing to see the change. People were interacting with loads of different people. There was discussions going on in topics that were fascinating, and it was different perspectives being shared. When the previous time I'd been, I felt that it wasn't different perspectives being shared. I was no longer the youngest in the room. So all of this was really quite selfish of me just to get other people there. So it wasn't just me. As I mentioned previously, people had always asked me, where can we find the young people? How can we get young people involved? And my answer was, go and talk to them. We brought them to them. We brought young people there in order to get a chance to talk. And I think it was amazing. And thanks to Campaign for National Parks for providing those bursaries, and Friends of the Lake District for hosting, and Friends of the Dales for just being amazing. What are the issues that face young adults then? They're the key issues that face lots of people. I would say it goes the lack of jobs, the lack of housing, and the lack of transport are the three big things. If you don't have a job, you can't live in the Dales. If you can't get to your job, you can't live in the Dales because of the public transport. It's all interlinked and connected. So here are the people who want to live in the Dales. This was discussed at the conference, and housing was mentioned at the conference a lot, the conference in the Lake District. There was a lot of discussion about second homes, remote jobs, how to get young people jobs. I remember someone on a panel talk about getting like sophisticated jobs, or something which was really quite strange. It's wanting to bring in people and jobs which isn't hospitality focused. Hospitality is the lifeblood of young people in the national parks. It's the only jobs that you can get. The only reason I was able to live and work in the Yorkshire Dales was because I took a job in the hospitality industry. People who grow up there won't be able to afford to stay there. Getting houses is incredibly tricky. I regularly look to see if I can rent places, and I think the last time I looked, there was 3 places. I think there was one in the north of the Dales that and maybe 2 in Settle. These were both over £600 a month, which is quite a lot. People who grow up there just can't stay there, but also the opportunity to stay there in terms of wanting to further their careers, wanting to go forward, isn't there. I would say that a big point is it's not just millionaires who want to live in the Dales. It is people, normal people who want to have a life here, who have grown up and want to continue to stay here. The issues with second homes and holiday lets is a massive one. If there's no housing, then where are people going to stay? Prices get gorged because of the lack of housing. Public transport is a big issue as well. I was lucky when I was in Horton and Ribblesdale and that I had the Leeds to Carlisle train line, but the trains weren't very regular. I had to sort of very calculate when I was going to visit home, when I was going to come back, and work around that. In terms of coming into a job, it would be very tricky to commute into the Dales. The bus system, again, Dales bus, the timetables are quite confusing, but there is some public transport, but it's not shown in the best way, I would say, and it's not easily understood, and it's not known when these things are. If you can't drive, you can't live and work in the Dales, I would say. So yeah, those are the different issues. So the future, going to try and be positive. There is amazing projects that are taking place in the National Park and the Yorkshire Dales, which are trying to engage with and get the opinions of young adults and get people's voices out there. My advice, as it was 15 years ago when I got first asked, was talk to young adults. Just talk to people. listen to their opinions and try and take on board their opinions. Their early age engagement is something that I'm not qualified to talk about at all, but studies have shown again and again and again how important that is. If you get people out into the countryside, if you get people caring about the countryside, then they will want to continue to care about it, and it will something that will be a path through their life. Like I said, there is amazing projects going on, such as Upskill Down Dale, which are creating opportunities for people within the national park. I want to highlight Creative Campaigners. I think Creative Campaigners is doing an amazing job. Friends of the Dales have been really amazing in terms of supporting creative campaigners, supporting individual creative campaigners. And our next event is we are having a Curlew Day in Malham. Neil Heseltine and Lee Weston have very kindly given us a field where we have made these amazing curlew structures, which we're going to place in the field on the 14th of April, 2024, and speak to people as they come through about the importance of curlews. This is, Lee Weston is involved with Curlew Action, and it is World Curlew Day the next week. So it should be an amazing day. If you're around, come along, say hello, speak to some of us. We'd love to talk to you. I think I've gone quite quickly, but I think that's just about it. Yeah, thank you very much for watching, and if you have any questions, please do let me know. This is my website if you would like to find out anything more about me and what I do. This is my email if anyone wants to talk to me, feel free. And on Instagram, I'm at Ruth Kitty Wake. I think that's it. Thank you very much.